Chapter 5. She found out a lot about fascinatin'. In the next few days, she made it a campaign to get his background and history. The picture didn't thrill her. First, where he had gone was a little town called Bellman, where the Progress Association had engaged him to appear at the Soldiers' Memorial Hall as part of a campaign to raise funds to buy an ambulance for the hospital. He was known as the human buckjumper. He could do anything an unbroken horse could do, and no man had sat him yet. He frequently made these appearances for charity and sometimes for wagers when challenged. He was a champion at other things too. He was a top potato digger and pea picker. To see him picking peas was an experience, the knack he had. He'd strip a plant in seconds, loading his hands with the pods, working them up over his wrists before he cast them into the bucket. His name was a household word around Port Peary. He would take on anything: wheat lumping, tree felling, shearing, always ringing the shed, droving, anything at all that suited him. He was always fighting, mainly because of insults, or imaginary insults, though he was anything but intolerant. He only worked when he needed money or felt the itch for a change. When he was in the money, he came to Tambourine and had a good layoff. He came to Tambourine because it was his favorite town, and he always had a home at the Marquis of Lorne, a footloose character with nothing much to do and all the time in the world to do it. That was the picture Barbie got, but soon it all worked itself out for her. On Saturday night he came home. He banged on the door, and she called out to come in. He did, sitting on the bed, and with a writing pad on her knee. She looked up, startled to see who it was, startled by the hard, dark look he gave her. His jaw a tight line, a nerve pulsing each side of his face. "I knocked this time," he said, "when I had less reason to." She stood up, her lips opened, and unuttered words. In a flash his arms were around her, holding her hard and helpless against his body. His mouth was on hers. She squirmed feebly, trying to thrust him away. The struggle hurt and bruised her. He let go, and she spun away breathless, furious, her body aching, her lips numb. "Are you crazy or what?" she gasped. "My bloody oath," he said, glinty-eyed. Passion and violence were all through him. It was a temperament she had not seen before, so much apart from the easy, nonchalant character she knew. "5 days I've been away from you," he rapped out, as though it had been her fault. She understood, flattered. "Why take it out on me, then?" She snapped. "What do you think I am?" "A bloody torture chamber, to put it mild." She swallowed, sword playing with his burning, angry eyes. He licked his lips over the peak of his rage of desire. She observed it and took courage. "You'd better go," she told him. The air of understanding, of generosity, of injured dignity inflamed him again. "You get my goat, and you rattle me. That's fine, isn't it?" "Christ," he said, "what you need is someone to do you over good and proper, and I'm just the bloke for the job. Don't kid yourself." "Oh, I'm not kidding myself. That's one thing I'm not doing." She swallowed again. Why say a thing like that? If you only knew how silly it sounded. I'll tell you. when a man gets as mad with a woman as I am with you, when she stands up to him, beating him every way. He wants to show her who is the master, the best way he knows how, and by God, she'll recognize it. Listen, she retorted, this is you. If you shake your pockets and they jingle, you're right. If a woman looks your way, you think you're Christmas. If you don't have a fight a week, you feel ill. Been in the library reading up on me, eh? Maybe I should cut my bloody throat. Sell your blood, don't waste it. Got a great habit of making a man feel small, haven't you? Have you got something to feel small about? He shrugged, quieting now. She seized on the change to say what else she felt, so that he would know and could think about it. Round and round a town like a wind, you. Leaning here, leaning there, blowing around the country. What's in you at all? No one to go home to, eating alone, sleeping alone. A drifter, that's all. Gives you a lot of time to think that, he said quietly. Seems to me, too, you're a bit the same. With a shock, she realized that was almost right. The description could almost apply to her. Do a lot of thinking, Barbie, don't we? She met his penetrating look, then turned her eyes away. He shrugged and grinned, calm once again. Anyway, he said, who wants to fight? What about coming to the cricket with me tomorrow? She turned her back to him, silent. See you about 1 o'clock. Doll up, I will. Then he was gone. Barbie looked through the window, saw his shadow crossing the yard to the cubby. Tears splashed on her clenched hands. They went to the cricket match. He was hatless, in his Sunday best, navy blue with a white shirt and a plain pepper and salt tie stuck with a fiery opal pin he called the Star of Bethlehem. She was in a black linen suit, Edna's, with a pale coral blouse, Edna's a dusty pink hat like a feather, Edna's, and a pair of flat-heeled shoes, hers. She was pleased and proud of the stairs. So was he, and made no secret of it. They didn't say much to each other. They walked home from the showground. He seemed disposed to talk about anything in his laconic way. Barbie wanted reactions and channeled her conversation. Soon they were bickering. How did you get so big? He chuckled. I don't know. When my old lady heaved me out, she said, the first thing I did after I was all spruced up was to hook onto her milkworks and go for it. Old man, though he said it wasn't milk I was drinking but broth, as Mum was a bit different that way. He glanced down at her serious profile beside him and smiled. Maybe that accounts for the power in me and the fine figure of a man you see before you. She looked quickly at him, then away. What it is to have a swelled head. He laughed. I don't know, he said. Sometimes I wish I was a little bloke again. No cares, no worries, not that I mind them, but always someone there to look after you and think a lot of you, somebody to care whether you lived or bloody well died. You get tired of getting into yourself for everything. Talk, company, problems. You like somebody that thinks it's nice you're alive and theirs. She ignored the implication. You want somebody to lean on. He hesitated a moment. Then he said sharply, Not me. I can lean on myself. I don't rely on anybody. Only me. Long as I've got these 2 hands and this headpiece, I'm all right. Nothing wrong with the hands, she told him. Not looking to turn on a blue again, are you? A pretty face could soon turn you, I'll bet, she said, quickly, wanting another question answered. Hasn't yet, he said. What's a pretty face? You can buy it from a chemist. It's what goes on inside that counts. You believe that? It's everything. He looked ahead. I like what's inside you, Barbie. Talk, she scoffed. How do I know that's true? She didn't look at him, but she could feel the spear of his glance. He said slowly, Nobody's easier to fool than a woman. You can put it over them like that. He snapped his fingers. Why? Because they're like kids. They believe anything a man tells them if they like him. Well, I don't put it over anybody. How can you be a louse and a man at the same time? What happens to trust and fair play if you don't give it a look in? You like it from others. Hand it out yourself. That's me. Barbie, gratified, felt he was genuine, but couldn't be certain. Gee, as Edna would say, whatever will you do when you run out of halos? He stopped walking instantly. She stopped. They looked at one another. Are you calling me a liar? Fascinatin' said. I never said a word, Barbie swallowed. Because if you are, I'll turn you up and smack your bum right here and now. It'll be sore for a week. You do, Barbie flashed, blushing pinkly, and it'll be the last bum you'll ever smack, I tell you that. Their glances tangled. Christ, I could eat you, he said, and without salt. You can eat at the pub, Barbie said. Tease on now. They sparred again the following night as they strolled home from the picture show. She had heard about the two louts whose heads he had bumped together that day in the bar. They were just kids playing up. He didn't hurt them, he said. She knew all about that. She thought he mightn't have meant to, but she had seen them being helped home. The incident prompted her to think of the man Rigby. What happened there? She asked. Rigby's a twister. He's a hum and a liar. She could see he was disinclined to talk about the matter, but she wanted to know. No call, surely, to show him up the way you did. He said something I didn't like. That's not hard, she said. You want to know, here it is. This is Rigby for you. First time I met him 3 weeks, month ago, in the pub. Put the nips into me for a tenner. Put a proposition. He's got some country to rabbit. He'd like to mate. What about me? Will I be in it? It sounds good-o, the way he tells it. He's got all the gear, traps, and everything, but he wants the tenner to get the old rattletrap out of the garage. I have a word with old Rosy-Face on the quiet. He tells me this Rigby is only new in the place, but he lives in a cottage down in Gibb Street and has 5 kids and a wife. I don't want to talk about this. What say we forget it? You've started now. I give him the tenner. He's to pick me up early Sunday morning. I'm ready waiting. He doesn't turn up. Sunday afternoon, I go down to his joint. He's gone, left on Friday, with a mate, and it's the mate who owns the jalopy. Rigby never had a car, let alone one in a garage. but what they did was to pile a load of booze in, and a bit of food, and off. How about we go down to the park? We'll keep walking. I just meant for a sit-down. He loosened his tie. It's bloody hot. Come into Nick's then. They sat down at the marble-topped table and had tea and sandwiches. She looked at him lovingly behind a mask of indifference. She told him to go on. He pulled a face. You'll wear me out. I'm using up enough words to last me for years. Okay, my tenor went on the booze. The missus and the kids there in rags. Never left 'em a cracker. She's on a handout from the police station. Well, what can you do? I went back on the Monday, took 'em a bit of food, chopped up a bit of wood. She's got that arthritis in one hand. That was okay, I left. I went back a couple of times after with groceries. Fair enough. Sure, she nodded. Righto, Rigby gets back. I've been playing around with his wife. That's what gets back to me. But he didn't say it that way. Way he said it was like this. I bet the next kid she throws, it won't be mine. His right fist was bunched on the table like an oaky knob, fingers thumping the table in rotation. His eyes glittered. So Rigby comes up to me the other morning. Second time I saw him in my life. Large as life, as though nothing happened. Well, you know the rest. She didn't say anything. She cast her eyes down, feeling an irritation of worry, a nagging presentiment of danger. He had done the right thing, and she felt gratified. But he had made an enemy. Enemies lie in wait. One of these days you'll go too far, and you'll get. He jumped in sharply, a wife and 5 kids, and he says a thing like that. Didn't hurt me, but fancy saying it about your own wife. She gave him all those kids. The rotten bastard. Nice little kids too. Barbie saw a chance to plumb him further in her own interest. Funny to hear you talking about kids. Why, he grinned, I'm going to have 10 or 12 when I get hitched and settle down. A fat lot of good you'd do for them. I'd be a champ father. You can't look after yourself properly, let alone kids. As for settling, you couldn't be tied down, and you know it. What about yourself, he said. What about me? I can just see you running a house. I'd give you a week before you went off your nut. I can do anything I want to, she told him. You can't. You dream and feel hopeless. I don't. Wrapping yourself up a bit, aren't you? Who's talking? She retorted. He looked at her, a smile touching his lips, slowly shaking his head. You're a fighting sort of a fool, and no mistake. I'm not going to knock about all my life, Barbie said, chasing the opportunity. That's for certain. Me neither. I'd like to manage a station up in the territory somewhere, or own a pub like the old Marquis. Do me fine. I'd like to own a vineyard in the Barossa Valley if I could. He made a face. What for? You don't want a vineyard there. They're as common as bums. Everybody's got one. She had made her point. She was satisfied. She would leave it at that. They went home. Barbie lay awake. She wished she could be sure that Fascinatin' wasn't just playing with her, leading her along, stringing her a line. I don't know what I'll do, she thought, if he is. I love him so much now that I don't think it would matter what he is or what he did. I mean, I feel it wouldn't matter. but I've got to be sensible. A few days later, about noon, Fascinatin' went into the bar to wash down the dust. He stood in the corner at the end of the horseshoe-shaped counter. Men lined it all the way around, lest the barman placed a schooner in front of him. Fascinatin' poured it down to the halfway mark and glanced casually over the assembly. His eyes roved all the way around, then came back to three men standing at the top of the horseshoe, about the middle of the curve. One was Rigby, hefty and grinning all over a face that was built to scowl. One, presumably his mate, a log with a hat on, and the other the rangiest darky he had seen, a man wearing a check shirt with a dirty handkerchief tied around the neck, and a shapeless sombrero with a brim that flapped up and down with his movements. His movements had the curl of the resiliency of hoop iron. "Who's the nigger, Les?" "I don't know him, Fass," Les said, wiping the counter. "Hear 'em call him Tom, that's all. Comes from up north somewhere. Taking a racehorse back to his boss. Didn't you see it on the truck outside?" "Who's buying the grog?" "He is. He's loaded. They all come in together. Been here about an hour. I know the one with the ugly face, like a hatful of toads." "Who's the other?" "The tough-looking joker, Mick Cassilis, they call him. He seems to know the nigger pretty well. Fill it up again, mate." Fascinatin' caught Rigby's eye. Rigby said something. The other two looked down the counter at the man Rigby hated. "Hey you," the man called Mick waved. "Come up here." Fascinatin' didn't move. He took a sip of beer. He thought, "Here comes trouble. Spit on your hands." "We've been talking about you," Mick yelled. "Up here, come on." "You've got legs," Fascinatin' told him. The bar stopped talking. It could have been Armistice Day. 2 minutes silence. The three men left the counter and walked down the room, Rigby coming last. They stopped in front of Fascinatin', Mick Cassilis and the dark man together, and Rigby behind, looking between their shoulders. Mick Cassilis had a caved-in, whiskery face, with eyes like sultanas. "My mate here reckons you couldn't chuck him in a month of Sundays. He wants to ride you. What do you say?" Fascinatin' looked the dark man up and down, elastic-sided boots, and blue ruckled riding trousers, and settled on his face. It was twisted in a not unpleasant half-grin, the eyes shining like licked aniseed balls. The whites were bloodshot. Drink in league with nature. No aborigine this, more like a gon, maybe with a splash of tar in him, Fascinatin' thought. The skin of the face was splotchy in black and tan and white, like a mongrel paint pony. "Who is he?" Fascinatin' said. "Black Tom, that's who," Mick Cassilis said, as though the name was in lights everywhere. "He's the greatest rough rider ever forked a horse. Never heard of him." "No horse ever throwed me yet, mister," Black Tom boasted. "And I been riding a long time. I rid that black demon, you heard of him, and Forked Lightning. He was a killer, but he didn't kill me. I rid that big stallion, Wildfire. He didn't do no good with me neither. I rid Red Fury, and One Eye the Savage, and Blue Murder. I rid all them, mister. Who'd you ever ride?" How much of this was fact and how much fiction, Fascinating didn't know. He wasn't interested. He certainly knew of some of the horses mentioned, but he'd never heard of a long coon coming out of nowhere to ride them to a standstill, and he thought he would have known about that. He said with truth, "I've thrown men like Dickie Marvel, Two-Spot, Cramsey, Sam Butterworth, Jimmy Welch. Heard of them? No, I've never heard of them," Black Tom said, implying disbelief. "Well, what about it?" Mick Cassilis urged. "I'll back him to ride you dead." Fascinatin' looked into Black Tom's face, and Black Tom showed all his teeth, like stained ivory. "I'll ride you for a $5, mister, if you fancy yourself. You got a $5, eh? Put your money where your mouth is." Black Tom put a blue £5 note between his teeth. Mick Cassilis slapped him on the back and told him he'd have a $5 too if Tom would lend it to him. Rigby came in on that remark with the same suggestion. Black Tom obliged with a show of good fellowship, soaking up the confidence they expressed in him, and saying they were all good pals together, and anyway it was only a matter of airing the money for a little while, that's all, before it went back into his pocket. Fascinatin' took £15, 3 fivers, out of the lean wallet in his back pocket. "Les holds the stakes, okay?" They agreed, and Les took the money. Men started to make bets among themselves. Fascinatin' downed the rest of his beer. "How do you want it? Saddle or circingle?" Black Tom shook his head. "No saddle, mister." "Spurs, though," put in Rigby, his eyes shifting, brow sweating. Fascinatin', about to leave, stopped short. The dribbling conversation fled into silence. Every man there stood waiting and watching. Fascinatin', narrow-eyed, picked off the faces of the three before him. The rest were just a smudge. Mick Cassilis stared, chewing on the butt of a dirty cigarette. Rigby stared, sweating, nervous and gloating. Black Tom stared with his fixed smile. Fascinatin' sized it up now. This was Rigby's maneuver. Cassilis might or might not have been in it with him. Probably was, even if not sharing his need for revenge. He was sympathetic. They were mates. Blathered in the black man's ears, worked him up to it. Ride him to conquer, ride him till he squeals for mercy, ride him into the dust. God knows what they told him, and the nigger wanted to show how good he was. He wanted victory, full and final, victory that was all the greater, the more telling his opponent was vanquished. "You want it that way," he said to Black Tom. Black Tom nodded, smiling. "I'm treating you just like a horse, mister, and I will be a horse," Fascinatin' said, in a low, calm voice. "They tell you that. Your pals." "What do you mean, mister?" "I'm a man, that's what I mean. I'm not a horse." "I understand you don't object," Black Tom said. "Just listen," Fascinatin' said. "Get this quite clear. I've been ridden bareback, saddled, circingled, cruppered, and once with spurs. A man gets on my back. I'm a man bucking him off like a man. A man gets on my back with spurs, and I'm a horse. It's kick, bite, strike, anything a horse can do. A bastard that wants to wear spurs, he's looking for all he gets, and that's plenty. You got that clear in your bloody skull. Let's go." They went out into the sunlit yard, the crowd following. from his dwelling, Fascinating brought spurs and a circingle. Rigby examined the spurs, turning the rowels. He seemed satisfied of their sharpness. Black Tom fitted them. Fascinating waited for him. "This'll have to be short and sweet," he thought, "if I don't want my brisket hanging in strips." He had no fear, only the cold nervousness of tension and anticipation. The last man who had ridden him with spurs was unconscious for 2 days. The crowd waited tensely in ragged groups. Excitement rippled through them like a breeze, but there were few words. They spread back staring as the tall dark man stalked across to his human horse. He grinned and put out his hand. Fascinating ignored it. "Horses don't shake hands," he said, and went to his knees. Black Tom mounted, gripping the surcingle. The moment the dark man was astride, he felt himself lifted as Fascinating came off his knees, and the solid, broad back under him heaved and gyrated, slipped and sunfished. He dug in the spurs. He swept off his hat and held it in his outflung arm. He found a wall coming at him. The horse twisted sharply and crashed and crushed the rider's legs against the stone. Pain shot across his face. He gritted his teeth and ripped with the spurs. The wall came at him again. The shuddering horse smashed him against it, shoulder, thigh, and leg. His mouth fell open. The horse bucked into the open. "This black bastard can ride all right," the horse thought. "He can ride, but he'll come off in a minute, and I'll stamp his guts out and kick his face in. I'll mangle the black bastard." The horse swung half its body one way and half the other. It reared on its hind legs, pawing the air. The spurs dug into its belly and thigh. Again and again, Black Tom's hand came around in front of the horse's face. He squealed as it bit him. Still on its hind legs and jolting and jerking, the horse tossed itself backward, slamming the rider against the edge of the stone wall. The rider's face was a piece of crumpled paper, rode and with clenched teeth like a skeleton. That loosened the black bastard's backbone. "He's not sitting so good now. There's air under him. Won't be long now," thought the horse. The rider felt every bone in his body jolted out of place. His bowels slopped and tumbled. A fiery ache jigged along his spine. "This is a horse," he thought. "It is a horse." He saw the span of faces, the jumping scatter of people. A choking sickness filled his throat. His belly was a bladder of nausea, swelling and knotting. Light split and flashed in front of his vision, harlequin colors. They drifted across his eyeballs like bubbles. "Yet this is a horse, but he won't throw me. I'll ride him till he stops. No horse ever throwed me yet. I'll ride him till sweat shuts his eyes, and his mouth drips, and his frothing nostrils suck for air." The horse ran at the wall, and the rider leaned back, framing himself in the basket of his hips and pelvis. The wall came up, the horse propped dead, and put its head to the dust between its forelegs, and the rider catapulted forward with his arms before him like a diver, and he went bodily through the wire-screen door of the wash-house, and the horse was riderless, and there was only a ragged gape of quivering gauze. There was no sound from the onlookers. They watched in an awed hush, but the horse was maddened still, snorting lungfuls of air, its underbelly tattered and bloody, standing there crouched, its forelegs dangling. The face and shoulders of Black Tom came to the hole in the door. The mouth lolled open. The hair hung in streaks like black kelp. The split left eyebrow was a red caterpillar. "Go and get him, Tom," yelled Mick Cassilis. "Use your fists." Over the panting features of Black Tom, rage came like a storm. Words came out on shuddering breaths. They were unintelligible. The horse stood up and became a man. "You finished?" "No, I ain't finished. Not with you. No bloody man's gonna throw me when no horse throwed me." Fascinatin' knew that pride was talking. He understood, but it made no difference. "Come and get it then," he said. "The other way." Black Tom smashed the door back. He stumbled and fell. Suddenly Mick Cassilis rushed in, put a full Nelson on Fascinatin', pinning his arms back. Cassilis swore at Rigby to tear in. 3 men surged forward to help Fascinatin'. He stopped them. "Get back. This is mine." His hands closed on the slack of Cassilis's trousers about the thighs, bunching the cloth in a steely grip. Cassilis yelled again for his mate. Rigby felt he had to make some show, but he couldn't bring himself to it. He stood in a funk, white and sweating, shaking. Black Tom was on his hands and knees, tossing his head, spent. Fascinatin' leaned over, still gripping Cassilis, easily lifting his feet off the ground. With a look of amazement, the suddenly frightened man, realizing the total ineffectiveness of the Nelson hold, threw his arms free in an effort to save himself. Fascinatin', with a powerful upward pull, threw Cassilis over his head. He thudded on his back, moaned, and fell unconscious. Rigby bolted. Black Tom stood up swaying, a pitiful sight. He staggered toward Fascinatin'. "No horse ever throwed me," he mumbled. "This one did. Why show mercy? It was a fair go, more than a fair go." The black sod had it his way. He understood what he could expect. The boot could have been on the other foot. What then? A big hand-clap, back-slapping, and drinks all around, with a couple of no-good cocks of the walk and a big black with spurred boots. Yeah, spurred boots, kingpin of the mob and fatter in the pocket, and a tail to brag about for all time. "This one did," he repeated, rubbing it in. "And what's more, you flew to pieces like a bombed John." Black Tom threw a haymaker, wild and weak. He grunted from the punch driven into his stomach, doubled like a snapped match, and lay still in the dust. Men started to mill around. Somebody came running with a glass and a whiskey bottle. Barbie Casaubon saw this last incident from the balcony veranda. It had been her morning off, and she had been down the town during the excitement. Horrified, she pelted down the stairs, thrust her way in, and knelt by Black Tom. "What have you done to him? You've killed him." She looked at Fascinatin' with blazing eyes. "Oh, why don't they stop you? You're too big and too strong. It's not fair." Fascinatin', recovering from his surprise, shrugged. "I didn't know he was your boyfriend." A newcomer was yelping on the outskirts of the crowd. "Struth, don't tell me it's all over. How's a man's rotten luck, eh? Who was up who?" "Get him into the hotel," cried Barbie. "What are you standing around for? What about the other man?" "He's gone," someone told her. "Strike, how's a man's rotten luck, eh? They fight again, do you think?" This disappointed man saw Fascinatin' and badgered him with the same question. Sure, Fascinatin' told him, getting away. Next week it'll go 101 rounds. 101. That's a funny figure. Why the one? Got to make it look good. Fascinatin' left him puzzling and regretful, and made for the cubby. They took Black Tom inside. The yard cleared. The doctor and old Rosy-Face arrived at the hotel at the same time. The doctor said Black Tom would be all right when he had a few hours' sleep. Old Rosy-Face cried to the heavens. A man turns his bloody back for 5 minutes and comes home to find a dead guy on his best sofa. What goes on? Where am I going to put this coon? There's not a bed in the place except mine. I don't want anyone in my bed, not on your flaming life. I won't have it, I won't have it. He put Black Tom in his bed. Barbie went down to the cubby and knocked. A voice told anybody there to get to hell. She opened the door and went in. He was stripped down to a pair of shorts. She didn't go out. She slammed the door. "Your game," he said. "Oh, shut up." She looked with pained eyes at the blood, the welts and bruises on his belly and thighs. There were scratches like the claw marks of a cat, where the rowels had rung along the bare flesh. She held up his shirt. The front was in ribbons. She saw the embrocation and the dish of soap and water on the table. "About to clean up a bit," he said. "Sit down," she told him, not looking at him. He submitted in silence. She bathed the flesh. Words seemed costly, but he was looking all the time at her clean-cut, lovely face, its golden skin and the sweep of her eyelashes like a foal's. The words left his lips softly. "You're blind as a bat, Barbie." "What do you mean?" "You want it in writing." "You don't make sense," she teased him. "How about we get married?" She kept her eyes down. "I would be mad, wouldn't I? Because I'd get awful sick of looking after you and patching up your broken head. I'd never be rid of anxiety for you, and I don't think you'd keep your eyes off another woman. Listen you, I'm sick of your cheek. Who the hell do you think you are? Look after me. You wouldn't have to look after me. Nobody has and nobody ever will. I fight my own battles. As for other women, you know all little dope. I'm trying to tell you I want you and nobody else. Nobody." She squeezed out the flannel, listening. "What do I have to do?" "Spell it out like a shake's bloody spear." "I don't go in for this love yabba. All I know is this. The minute I saw you, I thought, that's for me. I like the cut of you, your shape. I like your upper deck, the way you swing your bottom. I do not swing it. You swing it enough for me. I can run my eye over you 100 times a day and come back for more. You've got a face that gets my blood going. I like your cheeky look. I like your guts. I could hit it off with you." She looked at him, half shocked. She nearly laughed. She felt like crying. But she knew it would have been wrong to laugh, for he said what he meant in his own way, and she knew she could not have taught him better. He was waiting for some response. She dopped him with embrocation, appearing to be keenly absorbed by the task. "What would you do to get me?" "Anything," he said. "You wouldn't climb a snowy mountain." "Wouldn't I? And get over it too. Kill a crocodile, bare hands, and eat the bastard, teeth and all." Her face was smiling, but her tone was serious. You sure you just don't want to sleep with me for a night?" "Not a night, Barbie. Every night, for keeps." She sat beside him, given over to her feelings, her arms around him and her face buried in his shoulder. She made no sound, but he could feel the warm wetness of her tears on his flesh. He stroked her silky hair. "Fancy that," he said, "a big girl like you, too." "Oh, God," she sniffled, "you're a terrible mixture of a man, but if you want me, I'm yours. Just try and get away," was all he said. There was a good fencing job going, and soon as he heard of it he went off with alacrity. It would last a month, and he wanted all the money he could get now. They talked before he left and decided to marry on his return. He told her he would make do with a kiss and a cuddle and keep the rest of her for later. She knew he stood foursquare over the things he possessed. He stood over them as Ayers Rock stood over the ground underneath, safeguarding and immovable. He told her they would stay together, closer than the knuckles on a hand. She knew she had a protector, a hunter, and a lover. Barbie Casabon couldn't have been happier.